Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Greetings to everyone at the 7th International Forum on Spice Route. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak and for choosing such an inspiring theme, Spice Routes as Pathways to Sustainable Futures, Bridging Heritage and Innovation. I would also want to warmly greet Pathiamin from the Museum Bahari, who kindly proposed me for this forum. I am sorry that I cannot be with you in person due to my father's health. However, I am delighted to share some ideas that I've been working on with all of you who are engaged with spice heritage. I hope there will be some things useful or inspiring for each of you. Regretfully, my Bahasa Indonesia is not strong enough to give this entire lecture in Indonesian. However, to increase accessibility, I have prepared the slides in both English and Indonesian and will present with English subtitles. Please forgive any mistakes in the Bahasa on the slides. Who can speak? I want to start with the central question, which should be on everyone's mind when dealing with history and heritage. Who in the past has been able to define meaning and value? Whose perspective has been centered? The colonizer or the colonized? Whose voices were preserved in the archive and whose were left out? And today, whose perspectives are we choosing to center in the stories that we tell and promote? The question, who can speak, also reflects on our own positionality in our work and in our research. Factors such as nationality, race, education, and language determines which doors are open and which ones remain closed. For example, I am a white Dutch Christian woman with a PhD from an American university. This background gives me privileges such as access to archives, the ability to read Dutch and English sources, and a status that allows me to meet high-level officials. But it also limits my understanding. I was raised with a Western mindset and a Eurocentric view of history. To truly understand the lived realities of local communities and to recognize non-human agency, I must unlearn those structures and listen deeply to those with embodied and traditional knowledge. This brings me to another guiding question. Who is left unheard? Heritage and history are processes of meaning-making shaped not only by scholars, but also by marginalized communities and non-human entities. However, these voices have been disregarded in Western Eurocentric systems of knowledge. Decolonization seeks to move beyond these authorized heritage systems to acknowledge and validate other ways of knowing and creating meaning. Today, I will focus on some of the voices that have been left unheard or disregarded, the many voices that surround spices. The lecture today contains 4 main parts. First, I will talk briefly about nature-culture entanglements, moving beyond binary distinctions such as nature versus culture, material versus intangible, and human versus non-human, can lead to more inclusive and decolonial heritage understanding and management. This approach beyond binary thinking is especially applicable to spices, as this is a subject where human and natural influences are entangled. Spices are rich in many voices, processes, and histories. Therefore, I will discuss spices as a topic of polyfocality. Until this point, the focus of the lecture is quite theoretical. In order to make these ideas more concrete, I will use nutmeg as an example of a spice that embodies polyfocal heritage. Through this example, I hope to encourage you to look more closely at the spice at the center of your own research or work and to consider it within a broader context. Finally, I will reflect on how moving beyond these binaries and embracing the polyfocal nature of spice heritage can help advance cultural heritage management toward more decolonial practices. The nature-culture divide has been challenged over the past decades as a colonial Western construct within the authorized heritage discourse. It artificially separates the world into the binary categories of cultural and natural. An example is the UNESCO World Heritage List, which traditionally recognizes cultural and natural sites as separate categories. However, since 1992, UNESCO adopted the concept of cultural landscapes to emphasize the interconnectedness of humans and their environments. In spice landscapes in particular, the links between people and nature are especially explicit and present. Spices are often a product of domestication and have thus evolved from their purest form to the product we use today through human intervention. This not only goes for the selection of the best produce, but also for the way humans have shaped the landscape to optimize spice production. Similarly, the emphasis on material cultural heritage over intangible heritage has been critiqued as part of the authorized heritage discourse. These binaries are also an artificial construct, because a lot of material heritage is informed by intangible heritage. You could say that the meanings we attach to material heritage is what makes it heritage, and thus these are intangible values we apply to heritage sites. In the case of spice production, the tangible landscapes and the intangible practices are clear examples of such entanglements. Not only the cultural landscapes that I just mentioned, in which humans have shaped the landscape for a spice production, but material heritage is also informed by the intangible elements, such as sight, scent, and the supernatural. For example, Fort Belgica on Bandanera was an important place to connect to the rest of the landscape through sightlines, and it continues to be a place where the resistance of the Bandanese is commemorated through the performance of the Chakalele warrior dance on top of the fort. These sites therefore continue to carry meaning in an intangible way, and are often host to spirits that keep these histories and meaning alive. Finally, our approach to heritage is often anthropocentric. We focus on human history and agency, yet non-human entities have also shaped our activities. If we recenter them, we can gain new perspectives and support more sustainable practices. In the case of spices, for example, we might even consider the wishes of spices. Some only thrive in certain places, while others do not, inviting us to think differently about their agency. Historically, Rumphius even claimed that the nutmeg tree only grew in Banda because it had to be ingested by the nutmeg pigeon and pooped out to grow a seedling, thus assigning the bird and the spice a symbiotic agency. This can be said for humans too, as spices need certain treatment to flourish or to release their inherent properties. There is a symbiosis between the people and the plants. We need their produce, but they need us too. Next, I will discuss spices as a topic of polyfocality, because there are many ways in which we can talk about spices, or that spices can convey meaning. First, spices are of course plants and part of the natural world. They are studied in botany, medicine, and agriculture for its properties. Although I made a special point here about spices as nature, the study of plants and the use of their produce are closely tied to cultural practices. The scientific studies that traces the origins of the genetic code of certain spices, or the distillation of its properties for medical studies, are related to verifying the traditional knowledges about origin and medical uses. Therefore, spices are part of a wide array of cultural heritage practices, including culinary practices, sacred ceremonies, and other traditions. Clove is an example of a spice that is used for making decorative sculptures that give a pleasant scent for the room, but also are used for dental issues and have become a popular additive to tobacco for smoking. Thus, it can be connected to social functions, even beyond its locality, as it is currently considered as a spice closely related to the Christmas season and regarded by many in the world with much fondness. As a natural non-human entity, spices are often regarded as passive. However, they do influence our world and the behavior of animals and humans. We could even claim that spices are the root of certain historical events and can therefore be considered an active agent. As such, spices speak through multiple voices. We can call this polyfocality, as there are many multiple ways to talk about spices, but also multiple ways in which spices themselves carry meaning. Polyfocality in heritage of all kinds is created through meaning making on multiple levels. On the slide, I have listed 3 categories as examples of types of voices, including sources, heritage, and stakeholders. Regarding sources, we have been trained to focus on written sources, which often leads to an over-validation of colonial over other kinds of sources, such as cultural traditions, knowledge of nature, or oral histories. We can also look at the different types of heritage, not only focusing on the obvious material, tangible heritage, but also to the intangible, immaterial heritage practices and what nature can teach us. These 2 categories are all aspects that have been selected and informed by various stakeholders, each with their own aim and agenda. So all these levels coexist. Not one is more true than another. They all hold their own truth in reality. So far, the focus has been theoretical. To make these ideas more concrete, I will use nutmeg as an example of a spice that embodies polyvocal heritage. First, by using nutmeg as a starting point of history of the Banda Islands, we avoid the focus of one kind of knowledge over another. Thus, starting with nutmeg, the history starts with the unique maritime landscape that enabled the development of a special 2-part spice, the nutmeg tree with its fruits, including nutmeg and mace. Its medicinal and flavorful qualities spread across the Indonesian archipelago and beyond, drawing traders from China, India, and the Arab Peninsula. The high value of the spice also drew greed, particularly from the Dutch East India Company, who aimed to have a monopolic claim on the trade and production of the spice. To accomplish this, extreme violence was targeted to the Bandanese peoples, who had been fostering this spice production for centuries and fiercely resisted colonization. This culminated into the massacre